Hello. Only one person watching in the chat, but I understand from Raincat that his live viewers have something has happened to his live viewers, and I've noticed that something has happened to mine. But I think if I keep talking, more and more of them will arrive, but it will be fewer than they would be on my main channel, as I would expect, since it is that my secondary channel has only a fraction of the subscribers that my main channel has. And I've also noticed that YouTube seemed to be taking off my new subscribers almost as soon as they arrive. I don't know if similar things happen to political YouTubers of a similar hue to me. Or maybe they deliberately suppress your live viewers in order to demoralise you. And I know Raincat was making comments to that effect on his previous stream, which has gone, which he has privated or deleted. I don't know, it's a shame. But anyway, I did speak to him last month about his, about expressing his preference on neither giving nor receiving oral sex from his excuse me, wife. And I think this is a very principled and noble position to take, because, you know, for most men, they won't be able to say no to no strings recreational sex with women not their wives. In fact, men are kind of hardwired never to say no, because in a properly ordered world, women just don't have sex for fun. But not only women don't have sex for fun, non-human animals don't have sex for fun, because non-human females have to assess the attributes of a male of her species to decide whether he is worth having sex with or not. So she would be looking at his size, his strength, his other attributes, before she decides whether to have sex with him or not, because obviously it is quite a burden for a female, either human or non-human, to bear young and to carry them around. Even spiders with their hundreds of spiderlings have to carry them on their back for ages. And fish too. They kind of have to look after them. To the extent I think that little fishies just born, just come out of their eggs, are actually go into the mouths of mum in order to stay safe from predators until they're too big to go inside her mouth. Whatever your species, be you vertebrate or invertebrate, looking after your young is an onerous undertaking indeed. So even if you say, oh, these spider mums, they don't look after their young at all. They just, carry the spider eggs on their backs until they hatch. The fact is, it's probably not much fun to be carrying, hundreds of spider eggs on your back until they hatch. And then you can, get rid of them, and I guess you won't even recognize your children, your offspring, when you meet them again. And so if you might be fighting them for territory later, as a spider in, someone's home, and probably kill them as Oedipus did to his dad. But back to the question of sex and recreational sex. What is really unusual is for a Western man, and an American no less. And I'm just okay. I kind of did give up on Canadian men, and I found myself pleasantly surprised. And I thought, well, they're even better than American men, because my first secular Quranist was a Canadian. And anyway, I don't know. I'm so glad I've stuck with it. You might not think I've had much success, but I'm, and then you have this man saying, this bachelor is not just, he's already got his woman, and he's saying nobody else can have sex but married men. I'm already married, so you guys who want to have sex, you have to get married too. But Rain Cat is a bachelor, and he's saying, I don't want to receive or give oral sex, and my wife can't receive or give either. And this is so unusual that he's been called all sorts of names, saying he must have some sort of hang-up. But no, I think this is, perfectly to the point that, because, I think some of us know that in certain American states, oral sex is in fact forbidden. Or is it sodomy? Anyway, I think when the white settlers arrived in America, they were kind of into populating and settling the continent of America, and they were just saying, all sex has to be married sex, because we are, following the Bible in going forth and multiplying, and it cannot be that the Old Testament ever imagined that we would be fornicating and multiplying. We have to be married, and we multiply, and we populate the new world. And I think this rule would be more enforced by the colonialists and less observed in the old world of Europe, where they have grown, I guess, old and tired and degenerate. And so, settler people, they kind of know what they're supposed to be doing with their wagons and their guns and their, settler mentality. And so they were just told, nope, you can't be having your recreational sex. All sex has to be married sex, so you have lots of children and you quickly populate this continent and settle it on behalf of the white man. And of course, for Britain, because that was the mother country, you may not know that most white Americans now are in fact of German descent. And I found this very interesting. I didn't actually know that this was the case. And you think it is, quite ironic, really. And you think, why is it mostly are most white Americans Germans? And of course it was their religion, because most Germans then were Catholics, and Catholics were told not to practice contraception, and therefore they had more children than the Anglos. Now, I was saying on the stream that I think was regrettably privated by Raincat. He does curate the more interesting conversations that I have found online. Well, so I hope he's only privated them and not deleted them, because they really are fascinating. And it's because he has this non-judgmental persona, and he lets people say his thing, and in this way gets much more out of them than people who are only interested in putting forward their own view and talk over people in order to present their own view, but in fact fail to do so. People such as OV and Conops, with whom I tangled yesterday, and you can find a stream on this if you go to my channel, on this channel, the Hardcore Prawn channel. So yes, please subscribe to this channel, and obviously to the Claire Court channel. Now, why, you ask, is it so restrictive? Why do only married people have the right to enjoy recreational sex? And then you're saying, well, if the purpose is to avoid unwanted pregnancy, then we have modern contraception, and you can very effectively avoid contraception. But going back to Catholicism, I know I have expressed disapproval of the idolaters who are that are Christians, but I'm certainly not going to say that Catholics are entirely without wisdom, and of course it is the Catholic Church who forbade the use of contraceptives. And that was, why white men of Catholic German descent are now the majority in white America. So that is the legacy of the Catholic Church, and I don't want people to be saying that I'm going to just say bad things about the Catholic Church, even though I think they're idolaters. Of course, there is wisdom in many forms of religion, and even from their mistakes we can learn new things. Now, I was saying in Raincat's stream in the chat that really there was a reason why men were not even married men, were not supposed to have oral sex from their wives, because then it wouldn't be procreative, and that was not the idea of the colonial administrators for the settlers to only have merely recreational sex, because of course they wanted to populate the new continent. So that would be forbidden, and that I believe was the reason why it was forbidden in so many American states. So why is it fundamentally wrong? Because it's not only the white colonial settlers who said, no, 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 you can't have oral sex, or purely recreational sex. I think well, actually, I know for a fact that ancient Chinese wisdom is also to the effect that men must not be spilling their seed randomly, because it will it will have an effect on their masculinity, i.e., dilute it. And what were these ancient Chinese sages trying to prevent? And I think Muslims also said that too. It's that men must always take the initiative in having sex. They must never be in a position of passively receiving sexual pleasure. And the reason must be because they must in some way mimic the non-human animals, because non-human animals never get it for free. You might think they do, but really, when the female is finally receptive to them, she will have made up her mind about whether she finds him attractive, and whether she would like her offspring to have his characteristics of strength and long tail, colourful tail, or whatever it is. Or I guess in the case of the bowerbird, his aesthetic sensibility, and picking up all these things and arranging them in such a lovely way in his bachelor pad as to attract her and then mate with her while she's looking at his art exhibition. This is the case of the bowerbird. So the male of the species. I mean, why is the male tropical bird so much more beautiful than the much plainer female? And the reason was, of course, to attract the attention of the female. And why is the female so much plainer? And it is because, for camouflage reasons, she has to be plainer in order not to attract the attention of predators, either of her or her chicks. So all these reasons have a survivalist reason. Now, it cannot be denied that Western man, when he was strict in his regard for the rules of marriage and good parenting, that he achieved much more for his nation and his civilization. Life was hard for him. I guess if he was a Viking, he got kicked out when there were too many people around, and they people of their own race, their own tribe, their own clan, that can be quite ruthless, even with regard to their own. It's like, well, there's just no space for you anymore, son. You'll have to seek your fortune elsewhere. And this, you also know, happens in the animal kingdom. So you have a pride of lions, and of course the lionesses have cubs, and the male cubs, when they grow up, they have to go. They can't be sharing the territory with their papa. They just have to go, because that piece of territory won't be big enough for son and father. They have to go. And this would tend to create a situation where, man will be always going forth in order to multiply and take territory. And you may say this is a good or bad thing, but the point is that even if it leads to bad things like fighting over resources in tribal wars, the point is that the cruelly Darwinian Abrahamic God has kind of said, well, even if the whole world were secular Quranis and there is war, the idea is that the strongest nation state who follows my rules most correctly and accurately and humanely will be the world's greatest superpower. And so, even amongst these different theocracies operating under secular Quranism, there will eventually emerge a nation stronger than all the others. And this is, of course, very predictably, a lot of people, different people in different nations will have their own idea of how to follow secular Quranism, and of course the obvious thing to do is to cherry pick and say, no, I'll just ignore this verse, I don't like the sound of it, I really don't see the point of it, so I'll ignore it. And only time will tell about who God, if he exists, blesses with success, wealth and empire. Now back to the question of, because empire again brings us back to war and men and masculinity and the appropriate expression of it. So it is always the rule in a properly ordered society that women never make the first move because men are biologically and psychologically incapable of saying no to no-string sex, so they can't refuse. So, between men and women are more able to say no to no-string sex, while men will find it very difficult and much harder. Much harder than women, but of course, the reasons are obvious. So, to keep a man on his toes, he must forever be seeking sex, he must be questing. Otherwise, if he, from a young age, perhaps, and I fear this has happened to perhaps too many Western men, that they were got at by an older woman who, showed them all the tricks of her trade. The thing is, the seduced male adolescent, seduced by an older woman, will always be dreaming of receiving sex passively from an older and more experienced woman, and when this happens, he will be bossed around by her. And if enough men had that happen to them, and I suspect the numbers are becoming increasingly greater, the more passive men will be, and the more passive men will be, the more under the thumb of fornicating, immoral, irresponsible women they will be, and they will be so hooked on the idea that they have a right to no strings recreational sex that they will behave like women, talk like women and think like women in order not to give up their access, their sexual access to women, not their wives. So this is, I think this exactly describes the condition of Western man and of men in general, because my thesis is that men will, being primarily motivated by sex, will do anything for sex, including marry and pay for the children of their wife. And if he can't have access to a woman who will become his wife, he will go around raping and pillaging. But if he has the option of not raping and pillaging, then he will behave like a woman, talk like a woman, think like a woman, and even become a woman in order not to give up his sexual access to women, not his wife. And this is clearly what has happened to Western man. I mean, why do all these men who become women want to become women? I've wondered about this, and the answer must surely be, they kind of worked out that, men have to do all the work, they have to, they have to buy the favours of women, just to get their attention. You go to a singles bar, you see a woman you like, to get her attention, you buy her a drink. So you get to talk to her, impress her with your one-liners, or your wit, your charm, while she is drinking her drink that you bought her. But where was I talking about? There's something. So yeah, why men want to become women. So obviously this man who wants to become a woman probably thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to be a woman, and but then I'll get all these men wanting to have sex with me, and I do like to have sex. And obviously a woman, will always be getting more offers than she's prepared to accept for sex, because that is the privilege of women, really. A woman can always get sex if she's prepared to lower her standards enough. So this is, actually part of female privilege. And so I think men who want to have lots of sex but don't have much money somehow get it into their heads that by becoming women they get more sex. And they might do, I suppose. But then, they might trick some man into having sex with them, and then, getting angry when they've discovered that the person that they thought they were having sex with as a woman was really a man, and then they might get beaten up, which is, I think, quite common in this kind of thing. And of course, because they're sex obsessed, they'll probably end up in, porno videos, or, working at the cheap end of the red light district, because they, I think, transgender prostitutes, get the worst side of that seedy trade. So, my next topic is sublimation. And sublimation psychology means the suppression of our sexual urges in order to do something that is more socially productive than, than getting our rocks off. And this means that, an example would be a man falls in love with a woman. He knows that he has no means of supporting her, so he must throw his energy and time into acquiring resources to make himself worthy of her, so that he becomes marriageable and attractive. And he may not actually get the woman, because, let's say they both started as, childhood sweethearts. He's 16, she's 16, but obviously, by the time he becomes successful, she will be, she may not wait for him. And but the thing is, even if she does not wait for him, but he becomes successful, he will become an eligible bachelor, and women younger than her, his childhood sweetheart, who has probably married somebody by then, will find him attractive, and he will, in the end, find a suitable woman to make his wife. So that's how it works. I think it was Aristotle who set a kind of age for men and women to marry, and I think he was saying that um, a man of 30 will have had the chance to acquire enough resources to make himself an attractive potential husband to a woman of 18. So it's that kind of age difference that he thinks, that Aristotle thinks would work. So sublimation was clearly something that impelled Western man to conquer the world. He knew that he wouldn't be able to, just get a woman, like, because during that time, women were not cheap and nasty, and sex was not priced in such a cheap way that women, in order to stay in the game of having relations with members of the opposite sex so that they get a chance to marry them, it was, no sex before marriage. So marriage is the most expensive form of sex. And obviously, for both men and women, one had to choose carefully, because it would be just terrible if you chose the wrong person and was stuck with them and with their horrible children, and for the rest of your life. So, and of course, being young and foolish, men and women would have the advice of their family to say whether they approved or disapproved of their intended spouse, of their sons or daughters. So that was how it worked. That was how marriage operated within a society that practiced family values, that had paternal authority, and it is actually paternal authority that stopped sons and daughters from marrying just anyone that they dragged off the streets, all tattooed and pierced and whatever. So, and that, of course, ensured that the quality of the racial and national gene pool maintained a certain level. Unfortunately, this has not been done, and it's and I think you know why the West was not as it was. It's because of the sexual behaviour of most Westerners, and it is a shame that nobody else other than me, a female and a foreigner, is prepared to talk about these things to you. And I'm not really getting the attention that I think I deserve with my well-intended advice, which of course you cannot bear to hear, because what I'm doing is the equivalent of proposing to take away the bottle of a drunk. The point is that the sexually sated male is politically inert. He won't want to do anything that will restrict his supply of sex. Now, some of you may still know about the fall of Troy. That is a very interesting story, and of course it has an underlying sexual theme. But I'll read the chat for a bit before I tell you this story. Well, this Pastor J obviously doesn't like what I'm saying, but then he doesn't want to get married again, and he obviously regrets his marriage, and but the thing is, he doesn't want to get married, and so you can understand his position that he doesn't want to restore the patriarchy. He may complain about immigration, but he's not interested in solutions. And yeah, the you know that's a position most white men in the alt right actually take. They want they want a time machine, basically, so that they can say, an Englishman will be white without, asking any, superfluous questions. A British person, a Briton would be definitely white. Don't want to talk about that. Of course, I'm going to be white, and if I had anything to do with it, I'm going to, kick all that out, all the non-whites. But they can't even agree to restore the patriarchy. That their ancestors and parents, not their parents. I mean, they probably. Well, of course, I think I am making the point that they come from unmarried parents and they can't bear the idea of having to marry in order to have sex. So they're gonna hate my idea, and they'll be competing against Muslim immigrants who come from a culture where it is expected that people marry before they have children. So they can't compete, so all they can think of doing is to kill or kick them out. And they're not interested in solutions or even admitting that they might have to do what I propose, which they can't bear to do because they're hooked on their free porn and their and their casual sex and their casual recreational oral sex from women they probably on the first date. So if I'm proposing that they can only have sex with their spouse or have sex with a prostitute, they'll be, well, basically too cheap to want to do that. And that's why they throw rocks at my idea. Right, Pastor J? Pastor J says, I say that men will rape if they can't get married. I don't think you heard the end of my exchange with Dr. Kevin Barrett. In fact, he said that. It was he who said that. But of course, I knew that too. Because in a society where monogamy is not practiced, men will get rapey. And this is the sacrifice that men and women of previous generations did to give the West, the stable society that they once had. Somebody made an interesting point about anal sex between men and women as a form of contraception. I am reminded of this practice because I know an Iranian girl who kind of said this was pretty normal. I was a little surprised at the time, but obviously you don't want to go the Iranian way either. But I think we know that the Iranian interpretation of the Quran, or the Shia interpretation of the Quran, is more liberal and more creative than the Sunni interpretation of the Quran. And Pastor Shay says, I don't want to have sex with a lion, implying that I'm saying that he wants to have sex with a lion, but then, he does tell obvious falsehoods that he can later dissociate himself from and call it a joke. But then, as I've said to him previously, frivolity is a sign of decadence, and he is clearly quite happy to display his decadence in his frivolous way. Raincat says, nowadays you have 5 women supporting 1 man. Actually, this is what Connaught wants. Connaught is a Dutchman, a liberal Dutchman, who has a particular hatred for Muslims and also for secular Quranism. And he wants to live the life of this 1 man who is supported by 5 women. So obviously it's not a good bargain for women to go with this sort of thing. But I don't know, I mean, women, do they have to find themselves performing, degrading sexual acts for men they barely know, or do they have to keep having children for their husband? Maybe some sort of arrangement can be made that will be agreeable to both sides. But the principle must be asserted and articulated and understood. The reason for these rules must again be understood. And I think a lot of men aren't interested because they're atheists and they're nihilists and they don't want to make the sacrifices that their male ancestors did in order to maintain their patriarchy. That's because they don't believe in God, they think. And them nihilists who say, well, I don't give a damn after I'm dead. Even if I have children, even legitimate children that I claim to love, I don't care if I leave society in a mess and never bother to correct it because I'm a nihilist, I'm a selfish bastard, and I don't care what happens to my children even after I'm dead. Don't give a damn. And so this is a kind of attitude that signifies that your society is going down the toilet. Nobody else will talk about it but me. But I don't mind just talking to, just 5 people watching now. So Pastor Jay is saying, women telling the world how to live is where we have arrived. I think people who know, whether they be men or women, have the right to express their view. Obviously, if you don't want to listen to it, then you can go away. But I don't think you have anything better to offer, do you? Because whenever I ask you, you will be saying, I have no solutions. It's not my position to have solutions. And that's because you already know that nobody will listen to you. Because low-status men don't get themselves listened to. Particularly men who still want to have sex with women, not their wives. Mind you, you could still get away with it. I mean, obviously, under secular Quranism, I won't be, retrospectively criminalising unmarried parents. I'll just have to say, well, it's too bad that you have illegitimate offspring, but I won't be punishing you for the illegitimate offspring that you had before secular Quranism was adopted. But, I'm afraid, you can't do it from now on, and if you do, you'll get 100 lashes per illegitimate offspring. So Pastor Jay says, I come from a backward country. He's never been. He wouldn't go to any non-English speaking country anyway. He's the kind of person who just says, I don't want to go abroad. I don't want to know about abroad. I don't want to know about foreigners. I don't want to clutter my head up with ideas that I don't like. So, this is a kind of mindset that won't exactly be taking over the world. It's all, of course you'll need, peasants and such like to stay in the country and plough the land or whatever, but it is certainly not the mindset you would want of somebody in charge of the country. Yes, white cis male. You're getting what I'm saying. It's good when people do. But yeah, the whole point about men becoming women is to kind of get back power from them. And this is when women are hoist by their own petard. No, not women, but feminists. Because we can't assume that all women are feminists, even though most of them are. We have to be, more precise in our use of these terms, because we don't want to tar every woman with the same brush, do we? It's a shame that these transgender men feel that they have to, sterilize themselves after mutilating their sex organs in order to take power back from the matriarchy. When really, what they could be doing is, as men, cooperating with each other to restore the patriarchy, and not individually removing all masculinity from themselves. But then it is a sign of mental illness, and I am saying, of course, that the West as a whole, as a civilization, is mad, sad, and bad. And bad things are going to happen because nobody will talk about it. Nobody will admit it. You have all these philosophers in their philosophy departments in academia, and they're not talking about these things. Most unwise. And that's because, I guess, the West is awash with philosophy graduates who can't get a job, and therefore the only people who can stay in their jobs are people who toe the establishment line, and the matriarchy, being now the establishment, doesn't want to talk about the things I want to talk about. But interestingly, those who wish to oppose the matriarchy don't want to talk about the things I want to talk about either, which is why people like Pastor J keep throwing rocks at me, because he doesn't, he hates immigration, and therefore he thinks he has to hate secular Quranism. I think he actually knows what he has to do, but he won't do it because it involves sacrifice on his part, and he doesn't want to do it. So all he can do is say, Claire's not going to succeed, therefore it's not, there's no point supporting her. So all I can do is, undermine her at every turn, besmirch her reputation, and basically undermine her. But, for these people, it's only a show of overwhelming force that will make him think, all right, I'll agree to it, because it's about to win. And I'm afraid, most men do think like Pastor J. They kind of know that what I'm saying is right, but they don't want to do it. And, for low-status men, I can understand. It's like it's not worth with them sticking up their neck and agreeing with me when, all the men around them are not in agreement with them. And you can understand, men of their position not wanting to stick their neck out. But what about men in a senior position in politics? It's not working either for them because they're too scared. They're too scared of offending their wives or their daughters or their wives' friends, so they're shutting up and not saying anything. And that's why I'm saying Christianity is kaput and democracy is dementia. And so it's all got to change. And that's why you should be thinking of adopting secular Quranism, but you can't get your head around the enormity of what you have to do, so all you can do is pretend not to understand what I'm saying or try to discredit me. I don't know what you're trying to say, Maria. De Keur. So, basically, oh yes, I was going to tell you the story about the fall of Troy and the judgment of Paris. So, Paris was the son of King Priam, who was king of Troy. He and his wife Hecuba had a son called Paris, but the soothsayers said that Paris was born under an unlucky star and he would bring the city down if they kept him. So they left him in a place where unwanted infants were customarily left, and a shepherd found him and brought him up. Paris grew up to be a fine young man, and I think he won lots of wrestling matches or something. And then eventually he went to Troy, and I forget how he reconciled with his parents, but somehow they recognised him and saw what a fine young man he was, and they were reconciled, and he was sent as an emissary to various other Greek city-states. Some of you may know that he fell in love with Helen of Sparta, the wife of Menelaus, and they eloped together. But before this happened, there was the contest of the deities. So some of you may know that in the Greek pantheon there was Hera, who was the wife of Zeus. There was Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom and war, and there was Aphrodite, the goddess of love and persuasion. And for some reason, I think there was a kind of wicked fairy or something designed to cause division, and saying, here's a golden apple, may the most deserving female deity get the golden apple. And I think Zeus had the sort of invidious task of awarding the golden apple, and he was saying, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to get, whoever I award it to, I'm going to get into trouble with these three female deities. If I don't give it to the missus, she'll be angry with me. If I don't give it to Aphrodite, she'll be, I think she was his daughter. They were all kind of incestuous anyway, the Greek pantheon. So he said, well, we'll give the task to a mortal, and we'll let Paris decide. So you'll see lots of paintings called The Judgment of Paris. And so Paris was saying, well, who would you give the golden apple to, my boy? And So the different goddesses bribed him with their, with their kind of area of speciality. So Hera said, I will give you wealth and empire. And Hera was also goddess of marriage, I think. And Paris said, yes, that sounds all right. Wealth and empire. And Athena said, I will give you wisdom. And that is very precious because not all men have it. And Aphrodite, the goddess of love and persuasion, said, well, I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. And at that time it was Helen. The face that launched 1,000 ships. So Paris thought, well, if I got empire and wealth, it would only be to get the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. And wisdom, it's a bit boring, isn't it? Only old men have wisdom, and I'm still a young man in full vigour. I don't want to have this thing that old men have. I'm going to accept the bribe of Aphrodite, the goddess of love and persuasion, and so he got Helen, and they eloped, went back to Troy. Menelaus was hopping mad, got the other Greek city-states to besiege Troy for 10 years. And as you know, Troy fell. So, in this background, you might think that perhaps Paris should have chosen to give the golden apple to some other goddess. And it could be concluded that Troy fell because of its sexual immorality. Which, incidentally, some of you will already know this, that the no-hide laws forbid. And of course, which the Quran will punish. So I think I've said all I need to say on the whole thing about the thing. Any questions? So now, to sum up, you now know why men must always actively seek to have sex, even if it's their own wife, in an active way. Maybe they can have recreational sex, if they come to a mutual agreement about, what it is that they like, mutual consent, mutual agreement, nobody feeling exploited. But obviously, if unmarried people have the right to enjoy recreational sex, then why would they get married? Because even married people won't be saying that, the only time we had sex was when we had children. And of course it is rather frightening for any of us to think that, for every time we had recreational sex, we had an offspring. So yeah, I'm saying, even married people know how, that the sex that they have is much more than the occasions when they had procreative sex. And now we have it entirely the other way, so that in the West, the overwhelming majority of the sex acts are in fact recreational, and hardly ever any of it, when you think in percentage terms, is in fact procreative within marriage. And if you can sort of think of, kind of, I don't know, kind of bar chart or something, and you can work out, 100% of the sex. The proportion of it is purely recreational and not married, and then you can sort of get the idea of how far away we are from patriarchy. Or you can imagine that the perfect patriarchy would have 100% of married parents, and the perfect matriarchy 100% unmarried parents, and work out where on the scale your particular Western nation is. So I think the last time I looked, it was Iceland that had the highest illegitimacy rate. But then some of you may remember that Iceland went bankrupt and had a lesbian prime minister. And on Iceland sits a still active volcano. So I think this is something for statisticians to work out as to whether your particular Western nation is a patriarchy or a matriarchy. I mean, at what stage does it sort of tip over into matriarchy? So we know that I think 40% of children born now in America, 40 are illegitimate. In Canada it's 50%, in the UK it's over 50%. So the UK is definitely a matriarchy, and of course Boris Johnson has a woman, not his wife, living with him in Downing Street, in the same way that President Hollande, the former French President Hollande, had his kind of first slut instead of first lady in the presidential palace. So, and of course the current president, Macron, is married to a woman old enough to be his mother, and he won't be fathering any legitimate children with her. So, and of course Ireland has a gay prime minister. And I think how far you are away from patriarchy is the correct measurement of how far you are away from God, or if you don't believe in his existence, his okay, just think of it in terms of patriarchy and matriarchy, and I would define patriarchy as a society that prioritizes the preferences of married fathers, and matriarchy as a society that prioritizes the preferences of unmarried mothers who casually conceived and casually parented their illegitimate offspring. So if you're going to compare these two kinds of society and imagine them having a war with each other, which society do you think would win? And as you all know, or should know by now, all advanced civilizations are patriarchies, and all declining, primitive, extinct, and soon-to-be extinct societies are matriarchies. So if you want to live in an advanced civilization, what should you choose? Now, I wonder if anybody in the chat kind of gets me. But what, I do particularly want to highlight. I mean, I think we already know, how unusual it is to have a man say what Raincat said, and it is to be admired, really. He's actually wanting the right not to give and receive oral sex from his wife. It takes quite a while to get your head round it, because he is sticking to the principle that sex should be, in theory anyway, capable of being reproductive. And finally, I will just recommend my exchange with Dr. Kevin Barrett, in which it's timestamped, so you should be able to find it quite easily. And he is a anti-neocon professor of Arabic studies who is a Muslim convert, and mentioned in that stream how shocked Muslim women are at the bad bargain that Western women get. The fact that they have to put out so much so early in order to just stay in the game of having sexual relations with the opposite sex, and how no Western man will even think of marrying a woman that he's never had sex with. Which kind of brings you back to, why must you have sex with a woman or a man before you have sex, before you marry them? I suppose, the idea is that you want to know that they're good in the sack, because it's important to you, and you're not going to marry somebody who's not that good in the sack. Okay, but I suppose people who don't have the skills could acquire the skills together as a married couple, and in a relationship of mutual love and affection and trust and confidence, you could both improve on these skills, instead of being expected to have all these skills already, because obviously if you already have these skills, then you must have been around the block more than once, shall we say. And so, it sort of brings me to how important sex is, and of course yes, it can be great fun, but the point is that even however much of a sex maniac you are, there will be, in the end, you will spend more time not having sex with your spouse than having sex with them. So obviously you should be attracted to them, but I think the idea is that when you're not having sex, you must be able to find their company tolerable, without drink or drugs or shopping, and sex, so that you're quite happy to exist at a mundane level with them, as well as suffer the expense, irritation, and inconvenience of having to parent the next generation. So, maybe sex isn't that important, as long as you sort of manage to have a few legitimate offspring. It's like, I guess society isn't too interested in your sex life, as long as you do the minimum, which is to procreate and at least replace yourself. So, I think I have given a reasonable explication of the role of sex sex in maintaining a civilization? Oh, Mimi says sex is overrated. Well, yes, it can be. Or maybe it's an age thing. But what Rain Cat says is quite interesting. How could you marry a woman you've had sex with, is my question. And then this is actually quite old-fashioned. Are you saying, Rain Cat, that you're prepared not to have sex with a woman until you marry her? That's actually quite romantic. Excuse me. It is also a way of ensuring that you have a clear head so that you can correctly judge whether they are suitable to be the mother of your legitimate children, the other parent of your legitimate children. And I think you need to decide these things with a clear head, because I mean the trouble is that the sex could be too good, and this entirely clouds your judgment. It has been said that when men meet a woman who is good in the sack, their brain falls out and they can't be reasoned with, and they are led by their sex organ to the edge of the abyss, and sometimes over it, because they can no longer think straight anymore. So I suppose, if a man sees a woman he finds attractive and she seems to find him attractive, but they hold off having sex until they get married, I mean, actually I don't see the problem. If their first, experience of sex is not the best one, they're only going to get better, right? So it's better that they have a clear head when they choose each other, when they consider each other as the other parent of their legitimate offspring, than to make unsound decisions based on the quality of the sex that they've had. Because, I guess in time, if you live long enough, you will cease to become interested in these things and have hobbies such as golf and, whatever that you want to do instead, within the context of, a raised family and a stable home, and, living in a nice home in a nice neighborhood. And maybe that's more important than having great sex all your life. So this is something I hope is food for thought. So really, sublimation is the name of the game. What made the West great? And you can kind of see how different you are from your ancestors. Your ancestors were sexually deprived. They were, I guess, aggressive enough to acquire empire. They, used their wits in order to, for men to compete with each other in order to seem marriageable, to get a wife, to have children, so that they left some kind of biological legacy. And, compared to, the alt-right men of this generation who are basically saying they don't even want to marry a woman of their own race, even if they could. And they want to be gay. Because, really, what turns them on is their access to recreational sex. And if it means just being gay, but not having to pay for the children of their wife, they would rather, accept the bribe of the Chinaman Andrew Yang of universal basic income. And obviously, if they accepted the bribe, they would, have to they'll have to agree to be sterilized, basically. And they probably would agree. These white nationalists, they probably agree to be sterilized in return for universal basic income. So, if you can put yourselves in the minds of your ancestors looking down on you now, um, would they be urging secular Quranism on you? I rather think they would. So I think I kind of made my point, haven't I? In just over an hour. So thank you all for listening. And talk to you again sometime soon.